Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Therapist Theater. I'm your host, Josh Treese. I'm a practicing therapist in Music City, USA, and every week, a guest therapist, counselor, or social worker joins me in the theater to talk about a movie that we've seen and what relationships or mental health issues it highlights. Thanks so much for downloading today's show. Make sure you subscribe so that you don't miss any future episodes, and while you're doing that, you can help other people find it by giving the show a 5-star rating and writing a review for it in the podcast app. Oh yeah, and make sure you tell your friends. You can also stay connected with what's happening in the theater by following us on social media. Links to our accounts are in the show notes. We're going to try something a little different on the show today. Rather than the typical hour and 45 minutes interview with a guest, today's going to be the first solo show for Therapist Theater. That's right, it's just me. No, why therapy? No, tell me something your clients have taught you. And no, what's something you do to take care of yourself? We're throwing the format in with the Yule log and just talking about what we can learn from a movie. So make sure you let me know what you think. Let's get this show on the road. Dim the lights, raise the curtain, and start the previews. Welcome to the theater. Hey, everybody. So this is going to be the very first episode of Therapist Theater that I've ever done that will not have a guest. And a lot of that stems from, it's the end of the year. Here we are, the week of Christmas. And on top of all of that, it's 2020, where so many things that I'll speak for myself, that I've planned for the year just haven't worked out the way that I had planned them. And, part of that has even been booking guests for the show. Certainly doing interviews remotely has made it easier in one way, but because everybody's lives have had a few more challenges, it's made it more difficult in another way. And so this being the week that it was, I didn't want to ask a guest to give up, 2 hours of their time for the interview. I didn't want to give up, what's typically somewhere between 4 to 6 hours that I spend editing the episode. I didn't want to give that up myself and take time away from family. And I didn't want to, give up the somewhere around 2 hours to watch the movie. So all of that said, I still wanted to take the time to talk about a Christmas movie this week, because after watching it again, there were some things in it that I thought spoke really clearly and really loudly that I thought were worth talking about. So let's go ahead and just jump right in. This week, I want to talk about the movie Home Alone. Now, Home Alone came out in 1990, so I think I saw it in the theater when it came out. I honestly don't remember. I may have seen it after it was on video by renting it, but I was 10 years old when this movie came out. And when it came out, I loved it. I loved it for a million different reasons. I thought it was hilarious. I liked the idea of a, small child. I imagined that Macaulay Culkin at the time was the same age as me. So a 10-year-old, I loved the idea of him basically designing a death trap for these adults that were trying to break into his home. I thought that the house that he lived in was like an incredibly giant mansion, which as an adult, I still think that. But I loved it. I absolutely loved it. And this has been a movie that in the 30 years since it came out, has remained at the top of my favorite Christmas movies list. The sequel, Home Alone 2, just as good. Once we get past number 2, though, into Home Alone 3, and I think maybe there's even a fourth one, I haven't actually seen those, because once Macaulay Culkin and Chris Columbus jumped off the train, I didn't really want to continue on that ride. But I've loved Home Alone for so long. So today, I want to talk about 2 things in particular from the movie that I think it can teach us. And the first thing is resiliency. Resilience is defined as a person's ability to adapt to survive or succeed in difficult situations. And you can take that to mean, as far as difficult situations, anything that you want. What's difficult to one person is not difficult to another. What's difficult to the same person may change over time. In other words, what's difficult to you as a child will not be difficult to you as an adult. But resilience is a person's ability to adapt, survive, or succeed in those situations. And so when we watched Home Alone, I can't help but think about the word resiliency. And in the mental health world, this term is used a lot to talk about kids, but it's also used to talk about adults being able to withstand the waves that hit us in life. And in the movie in particular, and I wonder if I have thought about this in past viewings of it, I can't help but see resiliency displayed prominently in 2 characters in particular. The first, obviously, being Kevin McAllister. But the second, I think surprisingly, being his mom, Kate McAllister, played absolutely wonderfully by Catherine O'Hara, who is also Moira Rose in Schitt's Creek, which, if you haven't watched yet, please just turn on Netflix, search for Schitt's Creek, hit play, and just be a happy person for the entire time that you watch it. But I think both Kevin and Kate show resiliency in this movie, and I want to talk about how they do that. So the first, Kevin, obviously 10-year-old boy getting left home alone for what I can only assume is the very first time ever, and waking up on, I don't know what day it was. I don't think that it was Christmas or Christmas Eve, but whenever his family was traveling, he woke up that day that they all left and discovered he was completely on his own. Now, maybe at first he attributed this to a wish that he made, but pretty soon, he runs around the house, he dances a bunch, he screams, he eats a little junk food, he explores. But after that initial burst of freedom, what he, I think, comes to realize is, oh, I've got to feed myself. I've got to do these things that are normally done for me. And I think so many times in a person's life, we encounter the need to do things that we may not know how to do, that we may not have any experience in doing, but all of a sudden we're presented with this need to get done. And I don't think it would have been outside of expectation, outside of what would have been age appropriate for in that scenario, if Kevin wakes up to discover that he's, home alone, for him to just collapse in a heap on the floor, for him to panic, for him to, freeze up and not know what to do. I think if I was 10 and I discovered that I had been left home alone, I think that maybe my first instinct would have been to call a relative that lived in town. Like if I woke up and had discovered that my mom and dad and brother were gone, I think I would have called my grandmother or one of my great aunts. And I think I would have said, hey, I can't find mom and dad. Where are they? But in this case, and we do know that, along with Kevin's parents were his dad's brother, Uncle Frank. We know that his dad's other brother, whose name I don't remember at the time, was in Paris. That's why they were traveling there. So maybe Kevin didn't have extended family in town or something. But I mean, to even think, let me try to call one of them. Although, I don't think they had cell phones back then. But that would have been I would have thought to call the house of something like that. But Kevin, he doesn't think that way. And maybe he knew that he wouldn't have a chance to call those people. And so I think if I would have been in his shoes, I would have immediately froze. I would have immediately collapsed, just thinking, what in the world? What am I going to do? How am I going to get food? What am I going to... But Kevin doesn't. And so what we see is not only him not collapsing, but we see him, in fact, seemingly thriving in this life that is now just him in his giant McAllister mansion, right? We see him go to the store to buy food. The groceries, fall out of the bags on the sidewalk. We see him try to take care of his oral hygiene. We see him go buy a toothbrush, asking if this is approved by the American Dental Association. We see him have fun. We see him play. We see him do all of these things that, makes you kind of wonder, well, if his family never came back, would he be okay? So here he is in the face of difficulties, adapting and succeeding, which shows resilience. And so I want to kind of talk about something that contributes to a kid, or really a person's, ability to have resilience in the face of difficulties, okay? So I did a little digging, I did a little research, and let's start from like giant things, macro things, and kind of work our way down to smaller things. All right, so let's think about resilience in this way. One way to understand how it is that a person can develop resilience is to visualize a seesaw or one of those old-timey scales, like that statue that indicates justice is blind holds. Where there's like a tray on one side and it's hanging by a chain, and there's this like bar at the top, and on the other side there's another tray, another chain. And so, you put some things in one side and that side goes down, and you put some things of an equal or greater weight in the other side, and then that side goes down, or else it balances out. So picture that, okay? On one side of the scale, we would label that side positive outcomes, okay? And on the other side of the scale, we would label that side negative outcomes. So this represents, in the face of difficulty, in the face of challenge, a resilient person's scale is going to fall more towards the positive outcomes side than the negative outcomes side. So what do we put in these in the tray of the positive outcome side to I don't want to say guarantee, but certainly weigh things, increase the odds. That's what I want to say. Increase the odds that a person will develop resiliency and lean more towards the positive outcome sides. On that side, what we would put are something called protective factors. Protective factors, protective experiences that are going to counterbalance things to where we lean more towards the positive outcomes side. So, as I said, we're going to talk like from the biggest down a little bit. As we move down, it'll get smaller and smaller and smaller. So let's talk about these macro protective factors that help build resilience. The first thing is a strong cultural identity. So in other words, a person feels like they are tied to something bigger than themselves, which in this case, we're talking about culture. Culture could mean many different things. Being an American is a culture. Being tied to your family's historical, ethnic, national people group racial identity is being affiliated with a culture. If you're tied to a certain culture in a strong way, that helps develop some resiliency. Having an affiliation with a supportive religious or faith community helps build resilience. It's a protective factor. Economic stability, the ability to earn a livable wage. Now, if we're talking adults, it's the ability to earn a livable wage. If we're talking about children, it's having parents who can earn a livable wage. Having stable housing is a protective factor. In other words, are you questioning whether you're going to be under the same roof all of the time? Is there a need to move around for whatever reason? Having access to health care. When you get sick, are you going to be able to go to the doctor to feel better? And finally, having social support, connections to family and friends. So if we look through all of these kind of what I'm calling macro protective factors, strong cultural identity, affiliation with a supportive religious or faith community, economic stability, stable housing, access to healthcare, social support, connections to family or friends, a through line that runs through 4 out of those 6 has to do with connection. It has to do with connection to other people. And connection to other people helps build resilience, because the first thing I can think of, during the times that you think you can't, if you're connected well with others and you talk to those other people, you choose to be vulnerable with those other people, there are times where maybe one of these people that you're connected to is going to tell you, I know that it feels like you can't, but let me tell you that you can. Or let me tell you that even if you feel like you can't, I was able to make it through something similar, and I'm going to have your back in this scenario to help make sure that you make it through. So those are some examples of macro protective factors. We went from something like a cultural identity, which is a big kind of almost ambiguous kind of thing when compared to a solitary person, down all the way to connecting with family and friends, which is, much more specific. But also, things like economic stability, stable housing, access to healthcare. These are important things too. So let's move into like macro protective factors that help build resilience. So the single most common factor for a child to develop resilience is at least one stable and committed relationship with a supportive parent, caregiver, or other adult. Now, I get questions from clients all the time who are going through divorce who ask, what do I do to make sure that this doesn't break my kid? And in this case, I've got, 2 things to contribute to an answer that I give them. One, I'm a child of divorce. My parents got divorced when I was a child. And 2, I have education through grad school, through my, master's in marriage and family therapy that tells me, the single best thing in the case of making sure that your kid is able to adapt, succeed, and survive difficult situations is that at least one parent or, caregiver, guardian, an adult who has a significant role in the kid's life maintains a stable and committed relationship with that kid. So like if it's in the case of divorce, if you're the parent that the kid lives with, it's that you are fully present. It's that you're fully engaged. It's if you're the parent who maybe moves out and you still want to have a close relationship with the kid, it's putting forth that extra effort to make sure you remain in active connection to the kid. So research has identified a common set of factors that predispose children to positive outcomes in the face of adversity, in the face of difficult times, and here's some of them, just being able to have supportive adult-child relationships, whether that's with that parent who's at the house, but really the more supportive relationships with adults that you add into the child's life, the more resilient the kid's going to be. Is there a coach or a teacher who, can help that kid feel connected? Is there grandmothers, aunts, uncles, grandfathers, neighbors, maybe a leader in the faith community who's going to help that kid feel like they matter? Those things help build resiliency. Building a sense of self-efficacy and perceived control. So self-efficacy is defined as a personal judgment of how well one can execute courses of action required to deal with prospective situations. So in other words, self-efficacy is what I believe about myself as far as my ability to handle adversity. That's what self-efficacy is. So if you can help a kid build up their sense of that. I had a coworker in my job before I went full-time into therapy who said, and this was a guy that did or does like tech support for a living, oftentimes his kids would come to him with a problem. Dad, I can't figure this out. And he would say, what have you done to figure it out? Like, what's been your process in trying to discover an answer? And if they said, oh, nothing at all, like I just came straight to you, he would say, okay, I want you to try something, to try anything to see if you can figure out the answer. Now, obviously, this wasn't something he did if the kid came to him with a broken leg or if the kid came to him and their shoes were on fire or something. But what he would do is encourage them, hey, which is a way of saying to them, I believe that you have what it takes. He would encourage them to say, hey, you got it in you. You can figure this out, which is going to increase their sense of self-efficacy. So another thing that's a common factor that's going to predispose a kid to have resilience, providing opportunities to strengthen adaptive skills and self-regulatory capacities. In other words, letting them have problems, letting them get into situations where they need to adapt, and letting them attempt to self-regulate. So when a kid's upset, now this isn't like if a kid's crying, you're going to just shut them in the closet, like something like that. But it's helping them realize, oh, I've got this growing ability to not only solve or find the solution to a problem that I have, but to also regulate my own emotions, to also help myself deal with them and feel better. So the last kind of factor that's going to predispose a child to be resilient is mobilizing. Well, it's having sources of faith, hope, and cultural traditions, which we kind of touched on in that macro area. Really, the point behind that is being connected to something bigger than themselves. In other words, helping them to realize, okay, the world is not just the 6 feet of personal space that's around me. The world is bigger. The world has stuff going on in it that's not just involving me. So we talked about, everything from helping a kid develop self-efficacy to providing opportunities to strengthen adaptive skills. So how do we do that? How do we help someone learn to cope with manageable threats so that they can develop resilience? Well, I think the first thing is helping them realize not all stress is harmful. There's lots of different opportunities in every kid's life to experience manageable stress. And with the help of a supportive adult, this manageable kind of positive stress can be growth inducing. I don't know why that's the word I'm thinking of right now, growth inducing, but it can be. So in other words, when your kid bumps up against an issue or a problem, if it's not, life-threatening, if it's not going to send them over the edge, maybe helping them lean into, okay, this feels uncomfortable. This gives me a little anxiety on the inside, but helping them to experience that and, giving them little nudges, giving them little, hey, I believe in you. You can do this. That's going to help them grow in that area. And over time, we're going to be able to better cope with the obstacles and hardships of life, both physically, mentally, and emotionally. So I want to now that we've kind of outlined these macro and micro protective factors, I want to go back through, and if we think about them keeping Kevin McAllister in mind, just kind of examine, were these things that were in Kevin's life that helped him be resilient? So let's look at the first one, strong cultural identity. With that one, I don't really know. I don't know if Kevin had a strong cultural identity. He may have, he may not have. Did he have an affiliation with a supportive religious or faith community? In that case, I think that he did. I think that his family was either Catholic or maybe Episcopalian. We do have that scene later on in the movie where he goes into the church and watches the children's choir rehearsing for a Christmas service maybe, and talks with, old man Marley. So he kind of knew, okay, church is a place. I'm familiar with it. I'm going to go there to either pray or maybe receive comfort. But I think he did have an affiliation with a supportive religious or faith community. Economic stability. Did Kevin have economic stability? Have you seen the McAllisters' house? Yes, Kevin had economic stability. Did he have stable housing? I think we covered that. Did he have access to health care? We could assume that he did. They don't outright state it. I think if we're talking about Home Alone and we're talking about access to health care, maybe it's better to hope and pray that Marv and Harry had access to health care after what happens in this movie and the second one. Did Kevin have social support, connections to family and friends? So in that case, I think he does have connection, with his mom. I think he is connected with, he's actually the youngest of 5 siblings. Now, watching the movie parts 1 and 2, you see a bunch of kids present during this movie. You don't really know which ones are McAllisters, which ones are Uncle Frank's kids. So I had to kind of do some digging on Wikipedia and IMDb to see, okay, there were 5 McAllister siblings in Kevin's family. He's the youngest of them. I think he does have some social supports. I also think that towards the end of the movie, what kind of kicks him over the resilient wall, if you will, and even what saves his life at the end, was the connection that he develops with old man Marley. Does he have at least one stable and committed parent who he's in relationship with? Yeah. I think it's his mom, and I don't think that she necessarily always gets things right. And I'm thinking of specifically the scene at the beginning where, Buzz was eating his pizza. He shoved Buzz. He got the tickets wet. Uncle Frank says, "Look what you did, you little jerk," which, by the way, bugs me. It just totally bugs me that Uncle Frank says that to Kevin, and Kevin's mom or dad or anybody, any adult in that room doesn't say to Frank, "Please don't call my kid a little jerk." But I think he has, and so his mom takes him up to the attic. "You're going to sleep in here tonight." And then he says something along the lines of "I don't need anybody." And she says, "Well, maybe you should ask Santa for a new family." Mom gets a little passive aggressive. Mom gets a little sarcastic, which I think, I get it. I understand it. But all that to say, it's not like mom gets it all right all the time. But I think mom and he do have a special connection, right? So I think he's got that going on too. Other supportive adult-child relationships, well, he's got Mr. Marley towards the end. Sense of self-efficacy and perceived control. So does Kevin think that he has what it takes to defeat or overcome adversity and kind of be in control of his life? Yeah, I think he does. I think he really does. I also am just a little bit worried at how good he is at coming up with death traps, but I think he's got that too. Does he have the opportunity to strengthen his adaptive skills and self-regulatory capacities? Yeah, I think he does. That's kind of the plot of the movie. And so I think looking at all of these things that we've discussed, I think they're all present in Kevin's life. I think it's pretty clear why he is as resilient as he is. But if we take a look at those same things, and remember I said there's 2 characters in the movie that show a lot of resilience, the other being his mom, Kate. So how does Kate show resilience? Well, her and her entire family are on a transatlantic flight from, where are they? Chicago? From Chicago to Paris. She realizes halfway across that her kid's gone. And so from there, it becomes this, almost like a B plot to like Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, another great John Candy movie, to where she is doing everything she can to get back to her kid. Now, she's doing that because from Paris, she called home to the police department to try to get them to check in on Kevin. For whatever reason, they're a little too preoccupied to really take it seriously. A cop does go to the house. He knocks on the door. Nobody answers, of course, because he's a 10-year-old who's afraid. And she then says, all right, well, I've got to do it. So she flies back. I think she lands maybe in Florida. I can't quite remember. But it becomes this journey of, I got to get a flight back to Chicago. There's no flights. So what do I do? And then she keeps trying to talk to people. She keeps trying to find a way until eventually she gets home. She perseveres in the face of adversity. She tells herself, nothing's going to stop me from getting to my kid. And we could go back through these lists of macro and micro protective factors and see a lot of these same things that Kevin he had them because Kate and her husband had them, because they were the ones who provided those things. So naturally, she would be resilient as well. So here's the thing. Resiliency is not something that's just built in children. In fact, there is not an age where it's too late to build resiliency. Adults can build resiliency as well. You can strengthen any of these protective factors in you as an adult to help yourself be more resilient. In fact, you can a lot of things that can contribute to resiliency in adults is regular physical exercise, maybe stress reduction practices, something like mindfulness, or a good self-care program. Programs that actively build executive function and self-regulatory skills. So in other words, things that exercise your brain and things that help you regulate your own emotions to where you don't have to look outside of yourself to do that. So as we look at Home Alone, resiliency is present. It's present in Kevin. It's present in Kate. And it can be present in you. And the next thing that I really wanted to talk about in this movie was connection. Because I think at the beginning of the movie, what kind of sets the plot in motion is that Kevin's feeling a little bit of a black sheep, right? He's feeling disconnected and different from his family. And he acts out, which sends him up to the attic. And then the next morning, completely due to just happenstance, the neighbor kid comes up, starts digging through bags in the van so that when his oldest cousin is doing a head count, she thinks the neighbor kid is him. So she does a head count saying, we got everybody, and then they leave. So there's that, disconnection that happens. But the connection specifically that I want to talk about is the connection that Kevin is able to develop with Mr. Marley, one of his neighbors. That at the beginning, Buzz and some of the other kids and Kevin are looking outside the window. They see Mr. Marley shoveling the sidewalk with his trash can full of salt, which if you are right now in a cold climate environment, you are probably more familiar with this practice than others of us that don't live in that environment. I myself grew up in South Carolina, currently live in Tennessee. Snow was something that we sometimes saw once a year, and then when we did, we got 2 or 3 inches. It stuck for maybe a day, and then it was gone. So we never had to use salt. The only other place I've lived besides South Carolina and Tennessee is Southern California, and so, believe it or not, didn't encounter a lot of snow out there. But Buzz is kind of like telling this ghost story about Mr. Marley saying, oh, yeah, he killed somebody and he threw him into the trash can and the salt ate their body and blah, blah, blah. So Kevin, being 10 years old with an active imagination, naturally, gets scared of him. And then throughout the movie, has a few encounters with him that reinforce that fear. And when towards the end of the movie, he makes his way to the church, he's sitting in one of the pews listening to the music, and he looks over and there's Mr. Marley. And Mr. Marley gets up and walks over to him and says, hey, is it okay if I sit here? And they begin to talk. And the thing that sticks out to me the most in this scene is Kevin talks to Mr. Marley, and Mr. Marley talks back to him, not as if he doesn't talk to him like he's talking down to a kid. He talks to him like, I don't know if it's like an adult, but he talks to him in a mature way in which he knows that Kevin can understand what he's talking about. And Kevin learns Mr. Marley's story. He asks him what he's doing there at the church, and he says, I'm here to see my granddaughter sing because I can't come later. Why can't you come later? Well, I'm not welcome. Her father, my son, and I had a fight. We said some words, and we haven't spoken since. And in encountering Mr. Marley's story, Kevin connects with him, right? Later on, when Kevin leads Harry and Marv through the death traps in his house and then out of his house into another house, he gets cornered and Harry's going to mess him up. And it's Mr. Marley that comes in and whacks Harry on the head with a snow shovel and then whacks Marv on the head and saves him. And he does that because they were able to make that connection, And what he sees is, here's this person that he was afraid of, that he had no interest in connecting with. And once he connected, he was surprised by the things he had in common with him. And that basic connection led to a relationship which, in a very literal way, saved his life. And I can't help but, in seeing that, think of the times in my life where, for whatever reason, I have avoided connecting with a person. Maybe I prejudged him. I had a prejudice. Maybe, our paths didn't intersect directly, and so I didn't put forth that little bit of extra effort to connect with them. If I'm thinking back in my undergrad program, I remember thinking to myself about some other people that were in my major, I don't really want to be friends with them. We don't have that much in common. And then my senior year, really going out of my way to sit with those people and chat with them. And then I remember there was this tradition of, towards the end of every school year, the advisors of our major would gather everybody in the major together and ask the seniors to talk about what they've learned, impart some kind of wisdom. And one of the things that I said at that time was, I wish I could go back and connect with some of these people sooner, because being in relationship with them has made my life better. And for whatever reason, I told myself it was something I didn't want. And because my life is better with those relationships, I wish I could get more of it, And so when I see this movie and I see Kevin develop a relationship with Mr. Marley because he got to know his story and see what he had in common with it, and even just experience the basic caring that Mr. Marley had, for him, but I'm guessing just for anybody. When I see that, I can't help but think, what other things are missing from our lives because we're not finding active connection with people who we would not expect to find it with, for whatever reason. So as we look at Home Alone, we can see resilience and connection just in hugely, hugely active ways. And what I'd love to leave you guys with in the last Therapist Theater show of 2020 is this. It's that certainly we, as human beings in this world, have experienced adversity this year. The coronavirus pandemic has made life difficult. You know, we've been faced with challenges that we've never been faced with before. But here we are. Here we are at the end of 2020. And I don't know how many of you would say that you adapted to these adversities, that you would say that you found success in the adversity, or would say that you just survived it. But what I do know is that we're entering into a new year. And even though we've got, vaccines that are rolling out right now, that the adversity is not over yet. If you're a frontline worker, first of all, thank you so much for the sacrifice you've made this year. But you're going to be getting the vaccine, hopefully, first. And then it's going to trickle down into the tiers of people below that. So for some of us, it may be the summer before we get it. For some of us, it may be Q3 or Q4. But for whatever reason, a vaccine is not a magic wand. It's not going to just make everything perfect the way we'd like it to be. So the adversity is not over. So just like when we watch this movie, when we see Kevin and Kate show resilience against the adversity, I want you to know that it's possible to have resilience in the face of difficulties of life. It's possible. And I want you to know that if you're thinking to yourself right now, well, gosh, Josh, I can't pull the resilience together to do that. I want you to know that might be true. Maybe you can't do it on your own. But guess what? You don't have to do it on your own. We can do difficult things in life. We don't have to do them by ourselves. So I want to encourage you in this. If 2020 has just kicked your tail and the thought of heading into 2021 is scary, I'd love to invite you to reach out to somebody you care about and talk about your fear with them. I'd love to invite you to reach out to a therapist, and that therapist can help you build resiliency as you face the adversity. I'd also like to invite you to look in unexpected places and take advantage of the connection or connections that you can find there. In the movie, it's Kevin and Mr. Marley, but there's people all around you, some of them very close. Maybe finding a connection with somebody unexpected means finding a connection with somebody in your own family, somebody that you've always thought there's no way I can connect with. But you crack that door just a little bit, you ask them their story, and you might be surprised what you find. Esther Perel said, above all, it's the quality of your relationships that will determine the quality of your life. Invest in your connections, even those that seem inconsequential. So know that it's possible to develop resiliency and look for connections in places that may be unexpected. And that's what I get from Home Alone when I watch it. I stinking love that movie. I still love it. I hope I can watch it again before the end of the year. So we're going to wrap the show up right now, and we're going to wrap it up for 2020. So there's not going to be a show next week, but we'll be back in January. And if I could just say something a little personal, thank you. Thank you for listening to the show. This is the 96th episode of Therapist Theater. I am just constantly amazed at the fact that this thing that was born one night when I was walking the dog, out of just the desire to help people connect with their mental health and with relationships and use something that was already in their world, movies. I'm just continuously amazed that people have connected with it and that I get a chance to keep doing it. And so I just want to say to you, thank you. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for sticking through 2020. And if there's anything that I can do to help, I'd love to do everything I can to do that. If you're thinking to yourself that 2021 is going to be the year that you take your mental health seriously and you want to make a change by going to therapy, and you live in Tennessee, I'd love to invite you to consider maybe using me as a therapist. So you can find out more about what therapy with me would be like if you go to www.joshtreece.com, JOSHTREECE. From there, you can link to my counseling website, and you can find out anything you need to know if you're in the state of Tennessee about what being my client might be like. Guys, that's the show. I hope you have a Merry Christmas. I hope you have happy holidays. And I hope I can see you again in 2021. Thanks so much for joining me this week in the theater. I'll make sure I save a seat for you and a friend next week. Let's raise the lights, lower the curtain, and say that for this week, the theater is closed.